The night had settled quietly over Kensington Palace, the ancient residence resting in the calm dignity that had sheltered generations of royalty. Inside its red brick walls, the long corridors were nearly silent. Lamps glowed softly against polished floors, and portraits of past monarchs watched from shadowed frames. Everything appeared peaceful, the kind of stillness that only comes after the palace gates close and the world outside fades into the distance. But then a sound broke that silence. A cry, faint at first, small, yet unmistakably frightened. It echoed through the private family wing, a voice that did not belong to history, ceremony, or royal duty. It belonged to a child. In a nearby study, Prince William lifted his head instantly. The papers before him no longer mattered. In that moment, he was not thinking as the future King of Britain. He was thinking as a father, because the voice calling out in the quiet halls of Kensington Palace belonged to Princess Charlotte. And within seconds, the palace would move from peaceful silence to silent alarm. Because inside one of the most secure homes in the world, a simple cry had raised a chilling question. What could possibly frighten a young princess inside a palace? Crown the night had settled quietly over Kensington Palace. Within its red brick walls, centuries of history rested in dignified silence. The palace corridors, long and polished, stretched beneath warm lamps that glowed against marble floors and antique paneling. Portraits of monarchs from another era watched silently from their gilded frames, guardians of memory and tradition. By this hour, the palace had entered its most peaceful rhythm. Staff moved softly through service hallways. Security monitors glowed behind closed doors. Outside, the garden slept beneath a cool London sky. And inside the private family wing, the world of royalty had briefly given way to something simpler. Home. In a quiet study overlooking the darkened gardens, Prince William stood near a polished oak desk. A lamp cast a gentle circle of light across neatly arranged papers. The final correspondence of the evening. The responsibilities of a future king rarely ended with the sunset. Even here, behind the walls of Kensington Palace, decisions continued. Reports required signatures. Letters demanded attention. Schedules stretched weeks ahead. But tonight the atmosphere felt calm. William paused, placing a document aside. The quiet of the palace carried a comforting familiarity, a stillness he had known since childhood. Somewhere down the hall, hours earlier, laughter had echoed during bedtime routines. The voices of children had briefly filled corridors once reserved for state officials and royal advisors. Now those same corridors had returned to silence. In their rooms, Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis were expected to be asleep. The palace clock struck softly. 9:30. William exhaled slowly and leaned back from the desk. For a moment, the weight of royal duty seemed distant. But then, a sound drifted faintly through the corridor. At first it was so subtle that it barely registered. A small echo. A voice. William's head lifted. The palace was known for its silence at night. Every footstep, every door hinge, every distant sound carried farther than expected. The noise came again, this time clearer. A cry. William stood still. The sound was unmistakable. It was not playful. It was not laughter. It carried something sharper. Fear. Another cry echoed down the hallway. Daddy. The word broke through the quiet air. In that instant, everything changed. The papers on William's desk no longer mattered. The quiet study vanished from his awareness. He moved quickly toward the door. Inside the palace corridors, the air felt different now. Alert, listening, William stepped into the hallway, his footsteps echoing softly against the polished floor. The long corridor stretched before him, dimly lit by antique lamps mounted along the walls. Another cry echoed, fainter now, but unmistakable. The voice belonged to Princess Charlotte. William's pace quickened. Royal composure was something he had practiced his entire life. It was a discipline expected of those born into the monarchy. But at that moment, instinct moved faster than protocol. He was not thinking as a future king. He was thinking as a father. At the corner of the hallway, a uniformed guard stood watch, part of the palace's internal security detail. The soldier straightened immediately upon seeing him. Your Royal Highness. William's voice was calm, but direct. Did you hear that? The guard hesitated briefly. Then another faint cry echoed down the corridor. The soldier's expression changed. Yes, sir. William looked toward the east wing. That came from the children's rooms. The guard nodded. Yes, Your Royal Highness. William paused. In most homes, a child calling out at night would be a simple matter, a nightmare, a moment of confusion. But this was Kensington Palace, one of the most secure residences in the world. Any unexplained disturbance inside the private wing demanded attention. William spoke again. Notify the duty captain. The guard immediately reached for his communication device. But William added another instruction, one rarely spoken. Initiate internal protocol 3. For a moment, the guard's eyes widened slightly. Protocol 3 was reserved for unexplained disturbances inside royal living quarters. It meant the palace would quietly move into investigative readiness. No alarms, no public signals. But every security officer inside the residence would become instantly alert. Yes, sir. The guard spoke quietly into the radio. Control, this is East Corridor. Initiate Protocol 3. Across Kensington Palace, subtle changes began unfolding. In the security office, screens illuminated. Guards reviewed corridor cameras. Doors were quietly secured. Staff members paused, sensing the shift in atmosphere even if they did not yet know why. To the outside world, nothing had changed. But inside the palace walls, an investigation had begun. William continued down the corridor. The hallway curved toward the royal children's rooms, its silence now heavy with attention. As he approached the final turn, a thin line of light appeared along the floor ahead. A door stood partially open. Charlotte's door. William pushed it gently. Inside the room, the warm glow of a bedside lamp revealed a familiar scene. Books neatly stacked, curtains drawn, a small desk beneath the window. But sitting upright in bed, clutching her blanket tightly, was Princess Charlotte. Her eyes were wide. The moment she saw her father, relief spread across her face. Daddy. William crossed the room quickly and knelt beside the bed. What is it, sweetheart? Charlotte pointed toward the hallway. There was someone there. William followed her gaze. The corridor beyond the open door stretched into quiet darkness. Empty. Did you see who it was? He asked gently. Charlotte shook her head. No, but I heard the door. William placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You're safe. I'm here. Outside the room, measured footsteps approached. Moments later, the captain of the Royal Guard appeared at the doorway. He removed his cap respectfully. Your Royal Highness. William stood slowly. What have you found? The captain held a small tablet, displaying live security feeds. We are reviewing the corridor activity now, sir. William glanced once more toward Charlotte, who had begun to calm, but his instincts remained alert. Inside the most protective residence in Britain, something had frightened his daughter, and that meant something had happened. The captain spoke again. There is one irregularity we are confirming. William looked toward him. What kind of irregularity? The captain checked the screen. Security cameras along the east corridor experienced a brief interruption. William's expression hardened slightly. How brief? Approximately 40 seconds. The words lingered in the quiet hallway. 40 seconds. Inside a palace protected by layered surveillance systems, 40 seconds of darkness should not exist. William folded his arms slowly. When? The captain glanced at the timestamp. 2 minutes before Princess Charlotte cried out. Silence filled the corridor. Behind them, the soft light of Charlotte's bedroom glowed warmly. But outside that doorway, the palace corridors suddenly felt colder, because somewhere within those missing 40 seconds, someone had moved through the halls of Kensington Palace unseen. As the captain turned toward the security office to review the system logs, a troubling detail began to surface. A brief surveillance blackout that had occurred only moments before Charlotte's cry. And what the guards would discover inside that missing window of time would lead them deeper into the palace corridors than anyone expected. The corridor outside Princess Charlotte's room had grown quiet again, but the silence now carried weight. Only minutes earlier, the peaceful rhythm of the evening inside Kensington Palace had been broken by a frightened cry that echoed to the private family wing. What at first sounded like a simple moment of childhood fear had quickly revealed something far more troubling. 40 seconds. A brief gap in the palace surveillance system. Inside one of the most secure residences in Britain, even a single second of unexplained darkness was treated with caution. 40 seconds demanded answers. Standing just beyond the doorway of Charlotte's room, Prince William watched calmly as the captain of the Royal Guard reviewed the data on his tablet. The officer's expression remained composed, but his eyes moved quickly across the screen. Behind the calm formality of the palace corridors, a quiet investigation was already unfolding. Inside the palace control room, security monitors illuminated the darkness with a grid of glowing images. Rows of screens displayed nearly every corridor, staircase, and entrance within the residence. Each camera recorded constantly. Each movement was logged. Every door opening, every security code, every authorized entry. The system had been designed not only for protection, but for precision. If something occurred within the palace walls, the record of it would exist somewhere in those silent archives. The duty technicians began replaying the final minutes before Charlotte's cry. On the screen, the east corridor appeared calm. The polished floor reflected the soft wall lights. Portraits lined the walls as they had for decades. No one moved through the hallway. Then suddenly, the feed flickered. For 40 seconds, the screen went dark. When the image returned, the corridor looked unchanged, but the timestamp had moved forward. 40 seconds were gone. Inside the control room, one technician leaned closer to the monitor. Rewind 10 seconds before the interruption. The footage rolled back again. The corridor appeared empty. Still, quiet. Then the screen cut to black once more. In the silence of the room, the technicians exchanged uneasy glances. Because the palace surveillance network was built with redundancies, multiple systems overlapped to prevent exactly this type of interruption. A blackout like this should have triggered alerts. Yet none had appeared. Meanwhile, in the East Wing corridor, the captain of the guard finished reviewing preliminary report and looked toward Prince William. Control is examining the hardware logs now, sir. William nodded slowly. The prince's composure remained steady, but his mind was already moving through the implications. A security failure inside the palace could mean many things. Most were harmless, but protocol demanded that every possibility be examined. Behind him, Charlotte's room had grown quiet again. A palace nanny had arrived and was speaking gently with the young princess, her calm voice drifting faintly through the doorway. William listened for a moment. Satisfied that his daughter was no longer frightened, he turned his full attention back to the investigation. Walk me through the corridor access tonight. The captain nodded. He opened a digital access log on his tablet. The East Corridor serves 3 restricted sections of the family wing. Access requires staff clearance or escort. He scrolled through the records. Every authorized entry is recorded. William watched silently. Any unusual entries? The captain studied the list carefully. None so far, sir. Footsteps approached from behind them. Another guard arrived from the control office, carrying a printed report. Captain. The officer accepted the document and scanned it quickly. William noticed a subtle change in the man's posture. What is it? The captain hesitated before answering. The blackout originated from the corridor node itself. Meaning, the system did not fail across the network. The captain explained carefully. Only the cameras in that specific hallway went offline. William absorbed the information. A localized interruption that narrowed the possibilities. It suggested that the disruption had not come from a central malfunction. It had happened within the corridor itself. The prince looked down the hallway once more. At first glance, nothing appeared unusual. The lamps glowed steadily. The portraits watched silently. The polished floor reflected the quiet light. But somewhere in that corridor, 40 seconds of recorded history had disappeared. William spoke calmly. Who had access to this wing tonight? The captain tapped another screen. Evening staff rotations ended at 9:15. After that point, only overnight personnel remain. He continued scrolling. Housekeeping cleared the area at 8:40. Kitchen service passed through at 9:10. William listened carefully. And after that, No recorded entries, sir. Another guard approached from the far end of the hallway. Captain, the officer turned. Yes. We checked the secondary corridor doors. And the guard hesitated slightly. One of them was found partially open. William looked toward the guard immediately. Which door? The service door connecting the east corridor to the staff passage. The captain's expression hardened slightly. That door should have been sealed. Yes, sir. Inside Kensington Palace, certain doors were rarely used after evening hours. Once secured, they remained locked until morning shift resumed. An open door meant someone had passed through. William spoke quietly. Show me. The guards moved down the hallway together. Their footsteps echoed softly against the marble floor as they approached the far end of the corridor. The service door stood exactly where the guard had described it. At first glance, it looked closed, but as the captain pushed gently against the handle, the door opened with a quiet creak. A narrow service hallway appeared beyond it, dimly lit, empty. The captain studied the doorframe carefully. There are no signs of forced entry. William stepped closer. Then someone opened it. The captain nodded. Yes, sir. He glanced at the hinge. This door connects to the staff service corridor that runs behind the residential wing. William looked down the dim passage. Is that corridor monitored? Yes, but not continuously. It is primarily used during daytime operations. Another detail. Another piece of the puzzle. The captain spoke again. We will review those cameras next. William remained silent for a moment. Inside the palace, security systems were designed with both protection and discretion in mind. Not every corridor required constant surveillance, especially those used only by trusted staff. But tonight, that design left a narrow gap, a path someone could have used without being immediately noticed. Behind them, the hallway remained quiet. The palace staff continued their duties elsewhere, unaware that a small investigation was unfolding inside the royal residence. William finally spoke again. Has anyone confirmed the nanny rotation? The captain checked another report. The nanny assigned to Princess Charlotte completed her shift at 9:10, and the replacement arrived at 9:20. William's eyes narrowed slightly. Charlotte's cry had occurred at 9:22, a small window of time, just 12 minutes between staff changes. And within that window, 40 seconds of surveillance had vanished. The captain received another message on his device. He read it quickly, then looked up again. Control has confirmed something else, sir. What? The blackout did not trigger the system's automatic alert. William frowned slightly. That should not be possible. No, sir. The captain paused. Unless the interruption came from inside the system itself. The implications settled heavily in the air, because if the cameras had not failed, then someone may have deliberately disabled them. Not permanently, not loudly, just long enough to move unseen. 40 seconds. William looked down the corridor once more. The portrait seemed to watch silently as the investigation continued. History had seen many secrets pass through palace walls, but tonight's mystery was unfolding quietly within those same halls. The captain spoke again. We will question the staff who worked this wing tonight. William nodded. Discreetly, of course, sir. Inside royal residences, investigations were conducted carefully. The monarchy did not panic. It observed, it verified, and then it acted. As the guards prepared to begin interviewing staff members, another officer approached from the control room. Captain, there is one more detail. The captain turned. Yes. The guard held up a tablet displaying the security map of the palace corridors. We traced the blackout to the junction outside Charlotte's room. William stepped closer. The map showed the corridor clearly. 3 cameras covered that hallway. All 3 had gone dark at the same moment, for exactly 40 seconds. Then they returned simultaneously. William studied the map, meaning someone was standing here. The guard nodded. Yes, sir. The exact spot Charlotte had pointed toward when she said she heard someone outside her door. The captain closed the tablet slowly. Then, whoever was in this corridor knew exactly where the cameras were. A quiet realization settled over the group. because that kind of knowledge did not belong to strangers. It belonged to people familiar with the palace, people who worked within its walls. William remained calm, but the meaning was clear. This was no longer just a technical glitch. Someone had entered the royal children's corridor, and they had done so deliberately. Behind them, the palace remained silent, but within the security network, the search for answers had only just begun. Just as the captain prepared to question the palace staff, another guard reported something unsettling. A door along the corridor, one that should have remained sealed all night, had been found slightly ajar, and what lay beyond that door would lead the investigation deeper into the palace than anyone expected. The service door at the far end of the corridor stood open just enough to break the perfect order of a hallway. Inside Kensington Palace, doors were rarely left in such a position. Every hinge, every lock, every corridor followed a rhythm shaped by centuries of royal routine and modern security discipline. Yet tonight, something had disturbed that rhythm. Moments earlier, Prince William had watched as the captain of the Royal Guard pushed the service door slightly wider, revealing the dim passage beyond. The narrow hallway stretched away behind the walls of the private family wing, a corridor used primarily by palace staff during daily operations. At night, it should have been empty, silent, closed, but the door had been opened, and somewhere within the final minutes before Princess Charlotte cried out, someone had passed through this area. The captain stepped carefully into the service passage, his boots echoing softly against the stone floor. Two guards followed behind him, their movements measured and professional. William remained near the doorway for a moment, watching the dim hallway. The palace seemed different now. The same corridors, the same lamps, the same portraits that had watched over generations of royal life. Yet the quiet carried a new tension. 40 seconds. That was all the surveillance blackout had lasted. But 40 seconds inside a secure residence could conceal a great deal. William finally stepped into the service corridor. The passage felt narrower than the main hallway. Pipes ran quietly along the ceiling, and small service lamps cast faint pools of light across the walls. This part of the palace was rarely seen by visitors. It was the unseen network that allowed the visible parts of the palace to function seamlessly. Ahead, the captain paused. There are 3 exits from this passage, he said quietly. One returns to the east corridor. One leads toward the staff stairwell. The third connects to the gallery hall. William absorbed the information. Which of those exits is closest to Charlotte's room? The east corridor door we just passed. Meaning whoever opened the service door had entered only a few steps away from the princess's bedroom. The captain studied the floor carefully. The stone tiles were polished by years of staff movement, making footprints difficult to identify. But the captain knelt briefly anyway, examining the surface under the lamp. No visible marks, he said. One of the guards moved farther down the hallway, checking the other exits. Meanwhile, back in the main corridor, palace staff had begun to gather quietly under the supervision of security officers. No alarms had been raised, but word of an internal protocol investigation moved quickly through the residence. The palace was a place of tradition, but it was also a place of discipline. Every member of staff understood that when the royal guard began asking questions, cooperation was expected. Inside the service passage, the captain stood again and turned toward William. We will need to reconstruct the final minutes before the incident. William nodded. Start with the staff who worked this wing tonight. The captain gestured to one of the guards. Bring the evening service logs. Within minutes, a tablet displaying the palace staff movements was brought forward. Each entry recorded who had passed through restricted areas and at what time. The captain began reviewing the list. Housekeeping cleared the east corridor at 8:40, he said. He scrolled further. Kitchen service passed through at 9:10. William listened silently. And after that, the captain shook his head. No authorized entries. Another guard approached. Captain, the staff corridor cameras are functioning normally. Review them. The guard nodded and began accessing the feed. The service corridor cameras were simpler than those covering the royal living areas, but they still recorded activity. The footage rolled back several minutes. On the screen, the narrow hallway appeared empty. Then a staff member passed through carrying folded linens. Timestamp, 9:05 p.m. A moment later, a kitchen porter moved through with a small cart. Timestamp, 9:11 p.m. Then the hallway went still again. The captain leaned closer to the screen. Advanced to 9:20. The footage skipped forward. The timestamp appeared. 9:20 p.m. The hallway remained empty. But at exactly 9:21, the camera flickered. The image blurred for a fraction of a second, then stabilized again. The captain paused the video. Rewind. They watched again. The same flicker appeared. Not a blackout, just a brief distortion. The captain frowned. That matches the corridor interruption. William watched carefully. But the hallway is still empty. The captain nodded slowly. Yes, but the distortion indicates interference, meaning someone had likely passed through the corridor at that exact moment, just outside the camera's direct angle. The captain turned to William. If someone used the service passage to reach the east corridor, they could have remained outside the camera frame. William looked back toward the door, leading to Charlotte's hallway. Then the person would have been standing directly outside her room, exactly where Charlotte had pointed. The room grew quiet again. Behind them, the palace remained calm. But within the investigation, the picture was becoming clearer. Someone had been in that corridor, and Charlotte had heard them. A guard returned from the far end of the service passage. Captain. Yes. The gallery exit door is secured, and the stairwell locked from the inside. That left only one path, the east corridor, the one beside Charlotte's bedroom. William spoke quietly. So whoever entered the passage left the same way. The captain nodded. That appears to be the case. Back in the main corridor, palace staff had begun answering preliminary questions. Most accounts were routine. Housekeeping had finished early. Kitchen service had delivered late tea trays. Night staff had moved between wings preparing rooms for the morning. But as the interviews continued, one detail began to emerge. Two staff members gave slightly different accounts of the same moment. A housemaid reported passing through the staff passage around 9:15. But another attendant insisted the hallway had been empty at that time. The captain reviewed the statements carefully. Bring them both here. Minutes later, the two staff members stood quietly in the corridor. Both appeared nervous but cooperative. The captain spoke calmly. You were in the service passage around 9:15? The housemaid nodded. Yes, sir. I was returning linens. And did you see anyone else in the corridor? No, sir. The captain turned to the second attendant. You said the hallway was empty. Yes, sir. What time did you pass through? 9:17. The captain glanced at the log. The two accounts overlapped, meaning if both statements were accurate, someone else had entered the corridor between them, someone not recorded in the system. The captain asked one more question. Did either of you hear anything unusual? The housemaid hesitated. Actually, yes. The captain leaned slightly forward. What did you hear? A door closing, she said quietly. William listened carefully. Which door? The service door leading to the east corridor. That was the exact door they had found open. The captain exchanged a brief glance with William. Another small piece of the puzzle. The timeline was narrowing. Someone had entered the service passage. Someone had reached the east corridor. And moments later, Charlotte had cried out. As the interviews ended, the guards continued examining the hallway carefully. One of them moved toward the doorframe, connecting the two corridors. Then he stopped. Captain. The officer approached. Yes. The guard pointed toward the floor beside the door. There's something here. The captain knelt beside the threshold. A small object rested near the base of the wall. It had likely gone unnoticed during the initial sweep. Carefully, the captain picked it up. The item was small, metal, reflecting the hallway light. William stepped closer. What is it? The captain turned the object slowly in his hand. Then he looked up. His expression had changed, because the object was not random. It was something that belonged inside the palace. Something used by those who worked within its walls. A small identification clasp, part of a palace staff access badge. The captain spoke quietly. This belonged to someone who was here tonight. William looked toward the corridor again. The silence of Kensington Palace seemed deeper now, because the investigation had reached a new realization. Whoever stood outside Charlotte's room had not been an intruder. They had been someone trusted enough to walk the palace halls. And that raised a far more troubling question. Why had they been there? As the guards examined the forgotten badge clasped beneath the corridor lamp, one thing became clear. The mystery was no longer about how someone entered the palace, but why someone already inside had broken the rules that protected it. The small metal clasp rested silently in the captain's gloved hand, under the soft corridor lighting of Kensington Palace. The object seemed almost insignificant, a simple fastening from a palace staff identification badge, something that might normally go unnoticed during the busy rhythm of daily work. But tonight, it carried a different meaning. Moments earlier, the investigation into Princess Charlotte's frightened cry had already revealed an unsettling truth. Someone had entered the corridor outside her room during a brief surveillance blackout, and now this small object confirmed something even more troubling. The person who had been there was not an outsider. They were someone who belonged inside the palace. The captain rose slowly, still holding the clasp. Around him, the guards remained silent. Inside royal residences, security was built upon two foundations, technology and trust. Cameras monitored corridors. Sensors guarded doors. But beyond those systems, there was something even more important. The people who served within the palace walls. Staff members were carefully vetted, trained, and entrusted with access to areas most citizens would never see. Many had spent decades working quietly behind the scenes of royal life, which meant that when a breach occurred inside those walls, it was never treated lightly. Standing in the corridor, Prince William watched as the captain examined the clasp once more. "Can we identify the badge it belongs to?" William asked. The captain nodded. "Yes, sir. All staff identification is registered." He handed the clasp to one of the guards. "Run it through the personnel database." The guard departed quickly toward the security office. For a moment, silence returned to the corridor. The palace around them remained calm, unaware of the quiet investigation unfolding in its halls. From somewhere distant came the faint sound of a closing door, another part of the palace settling into the night. William folded his arms. For a man raised within royal protocol, moments like this carried a particular weight. The monarchy existed not only through tradition and ceremony, but through the discipline of those who protected it. And when that discipline faltered, even slightly, the consequences could ripple through the entire institution. The captain spoke quietly. "There are several possibilities, sir." William looked toward him. "Go on." "The staff member may have entered the corridor unintentionally," the captain explained. "A routine task, a forgotten item." He paused briefly. "Or they may have misunderstood the access boundaries." William considered the idea. "Either way, they should not have been here." "No, sir. The corridor outside the royal children's rooms was restricted after evening hours. Staff could only enter under specific circumstances, and always with proper notification. That rule existed for a simple reason: privacy, security, and the protection of the royal family's youngest members." The captain continued examining the area near the door. If someone opened the service door, stepped into this hallway, and then left quickly, it could explain why the cameras only lost 40 seconds. William nodded slowly, and Charlotte heard the movement. "Yes, sir." The captain looked back toward the bedroom door. A child alone at night would naturally react with fear. William remained quiet. For a moment, the investigation seemed to pause between two possibilities. One suggested something serious. The other suggested something human. A mistake. A misunderstanding. But inside a palace where every rule existed for a reason, even a small mistake carried consequences. Footsteps approached again. The guard who had taken the clasp returned from the control room. "Captain." The officer turned. "Yes." "We found the badge record." The captain took the tablet and studied the information. His expression remained composed, but William noticed a slight tightening of his posture. "Who does it belong to?" William asked. The captain glanced up. "It is registered to a senior household attendant." "Name?" "Margaret Ellison, sir." The name carried recognition. Ellison had worked within the palace for many years. She was part of the trusted household staff responsible for maintaining several areas of the residential wing. William spoke carefully. How long has she served here? 17 years, sir. A long time. Long enough to understand every protocol inside the palace, which made her possible involvement both surprising and complicated. The captain continued reviewing the data. Her duties tonight included preparing guest rooms on the west side of the residence. William frowned slightly. That is not near the east corridor. No, sir. The captain handed the tablet back to the guard. Bring her here. Minutes later, a woman in her early 50s appeared in the corridor. Her uniform was immaculate, though her expression showed concern. She looked from the guards to William and bowed respectfully. Your Royal Highness. William nodded politely. Mrs. Ellison. The captain stepped forward. Mrs. Ellison, we need to ask you a few questions. Of course. The captain held up the metal clasp. Do you recognize this? Ellison looked at it carefully. Her eyes widened slightly. Yes, that belongs to my badge. Where's your badge now? She reached instinctively toward her uniform collar. The clasp that normally secured her identification card was missing. Ellison looked back at the captain, confused. I must have lost it earlier. Where? I'm not sure. The captain's voice remained calm. Were you in the east corridor tonight? Ellison hesitated. For a moment, uncertainty crossed her face. Then she answered quietly. Yes. The corridor fell silent. William watched carefully. What time? The captain asked. Just before 9:20, Ellison replied. Why? She clasped her hands together nervously. I realized I had left a tray in the service passage earlier in the evening. I went to retrieve it before the night shift began. The captain nodded slowly. And you used the service door? Yes. Did you enter the east corridor? Ellison hesitated again. Yes, briefly. The captain glanced toward William. That matched the timeline. Ellison continued speaking. I only stepped out to check if the hallway was clear. I didn't realize the princess's room was so close. William's voice remained steady. Did you approach the bedroom door? No, sir. I simply stepped into the corridor for a moment, and then I heard movement inside one of the rooms, so I returned to the passage immediately. The captain looked down at the timestamp on the report. That moment would have coincided with the surveillance interruption. Ellison's expression grew more worried. I didn't touch the camera, sir. The captain nodded. We are still examining the system. William studied her quietly. 17 years of service. A long record of trust. And yet tonight, a simple deviation from protocol had frightened his daughter. He spoke calmly. Mrs. Ellison, do you understand why these rules exist? Yes, Your Royal Highness. Then you understand why entering this corridor without clearance is a serious matter. Ellison lowered her eyes. Yes, sir. The captain stepped back slightly, giving William space to speak. For a moment, the prince remained silent. The palace corridors around them seemed to listen. This was the part of leadership rarely seen by the public. Not speeches, not ceremonies, but decisions. The quiet judgment required when duty and humanity collided. Finally, William spoke. Mrs. Ellison, your service to this household is appreciated. She looked up cautiously. But the security protocols protecting my family are not optional. Yes, sir. A mistake inside these walls can cause fear, even when no harm is intended. Ellison nodded slowly. I understand. The captain recorded the final notes of the interview. The investigation had revealed its answer. There had been no intruder, no deliberate threat, only a small lapse in discipline. But even small lapses mattered. William turned toward the captain. Review the surveillance system. Yes, sir. And ensure the protocols are reinforced. Of course. As Ellison was escorted back to the staff quarters, the corridor slowly returned to quiet. The palace was settling again. The investigation had uncovered its truth, and the truth, while less dramatic than feared, carried its own lesson, because within royal walls, trust was precious, and trust required vigilance. As the final reports were prepared and the corridor lights dimmed once more, Prince William faced a final decision, one that would restore order within the palace, but quietly reshape how trust and discipline were understood inside its ancient walls. The corridor had returned to silence. Only hours earlier, tension had moved quietly through the private wing of Kensington Palace, carried by a frightened cry that echoed through halls usually defined by calm routine. What began as a moment of childhood fear had slowly unfolded into a careful investigation, one that tested both the palace security system and the trust that held it together. Now, the truth had emerged, and with it came a decision. Standing near the same hallway where the disturbance had occurred, Prince William listened as the captain of the Royal Guard delivered the final briefing of the night. The officer's voice remained steady and professional. System diagnostics confirmed that the temporary camera blackout was triggered by localized signal interference. William folded his arms slightly. Interference caused by what? Most likely a portable communication device passing directly beneath the camera node, the captain explained. The signal disruption lasted 40 seconds, long enough to interrupt the feed, but not damage the system. William nodded slowly. So it was accidental. Yes, sir. Inside the palace, security systems were designed to withstand external threats, but internal movement, particularly by staff carrying communication equipment, could sometimes create brief distortions if positioned at the exact point where multiple surveillance channels intersected. Tonight, that coincidence had aligned with a moment of human error. Mrs. Ellison, the household attendant who had stepped briefly into the corridor outside Princess Charlotte's room, had unknowingly passed through a precise spot where the surveillance signal converged. 40 seconds. Enough to erase the record of her presence, and enough to frighten a child who heard an unfamiliar movement outside her door. The captain continued speaking. We have reviewed the service corridor footage again. Mrs. Ellison's account is consistent with the timeline. William remained quiet. The investigation had ruled out malicious intent. No intruder. No deliberate attempt to breach palace security. Just a moment when routine had slipped outside its carefully defined boundaries. Yet inside royal institutions, boundaries existed for a reason. The captain placed a final report on the tablet screen. Your Royal Highness, the situation has been contained. The staff member has acknowledged the protocol violation. William looked down the corridor once more. The lamps cast the same soft light they always had. The polished floor reflected the quiet stillness of the palace. Nothing appeared different. Yet the events of the evening had revealed something deeper about the unseen systems that protected royal life. William finally spoke. Mrs. Ellison's record? 17 years of service without incident. That mattered. Inside Kensington Palace, loyalty was not measured only by titles or authority. It was measured by years of quiet dedication. The kind of work that kept the palace running smoothly without ever appearing in public view. William nodded slightly. Then the response should reflect that history. The captain understood immediately. A formal disciplinary record would be issued. Protocol retraining would follow, but the consequences would remain measured, firm, not punitive, because a monarchy depended not only on discipline, but also on fairness. The captain closed the report. I will inform a household office. Thank you. For a moment, both men stood in silence. Then William spoke again. There is one more matter. The captain waited. The children. Yes, sir. William's voice softened slightly. My daughter was frightened tonight. Yes, Your Royal Highness. And fear inside these walls spreads quickly if not addressed. The captain nodded. The corridor will remain under quiet observation for the rest of the night. That will not be necessary, William said gently. The captain looked up. William continued. Charlotte needs reassurance, not patrols. The captain understood the meaning behind the words. Security protected the palace, but reassurance protected the family. As the guard officers dispersed to complete their reports, William turned back toward the family wing. The palace corridors were quiet once more, but now the silence felt different. Earlier, it had been filled with uncertainty. Now it carried resolution. As he approached Charlotte's room, the soft glow of the bedside lamp still shone through the doorway. Inside, the palace nanny sat quietly in a chair near the bed, reading softly from a book. When she saw William, she rose respectfully. Your Royal Highness. William nodded politely. Thank you. I'll take it from here. The nanny closed the book and stepped quietly from the room. Inside the bedroom, Princess Charlotte lay beneath her blanket, her eyes half open. She looked toward the door as William entered. "Daddy," he smiled gently. "Yes, sweetheart." William sat beside the bed. The hallway is quiet again. Charlotte studied his face carefully. Was someone there? William considered the question for a moment. Children understood honesty better than complicated explanations. "It was someone who works here," he said calmly. "They made a mistake and went into the wrong hallway." Charlotte blinked. "So, they weren't trying to scare me?" "No." Her shoulders relaxed slightly beneath the blanket. "I thought maybe it was a stranger." William shook his head gently. "No strangers here tonight." Charlotte was quiet for a moment. Then she asked another question. "Did the guards find out?" William smiled faintly. "They did their job very well." The palace guard had protected the monarchy for centuries. Their presence was part of the unseen structure that allowed royal life to continue safely. But tonight, the situation had required something else. A father's reassurance. Charlotte yawned slightly, the tension of the evening finally fading. William adjusted the blanket around her shoulders. "Try to sleep now." She nodded. "Good night, Daddy." "Good night." William remained seated beside the bed for another moment. Outside the window, the palace gardens were dark and peaceful again. From somewhere distant in the residence came the faint sound of a clock striking 10. The palace was returning to its timeless rhythm. Eventually, William stood and walked toward the door. Before leaving, he glanced once more at Charlotte's bed. She was already asleep. The fear that had shaken the quiet halls of Kensington Palace had passed. Outside the room, the corridor stretched silent and calm. The portraits along the walls seemed to watch as they always had. Silent witnesses to the countless small moments that shaped royal life. Tonight's moment would never appear in history books. No ceremony would mark it. No public statement would mention it. Yet inside the quiet walls of the palace, it had revealed something important. Because leadership inside a monarchy was not measured only during grand occasions. Sometimes it was measured in the quiet decisions made when no one else was watching. Decisions that balance authority with understanding, protocol with compassion, and duty with family. William walked slowly down the corridor toward the staircase. Behind him, the palace lights dimmed further as night settled across the residence. The investigation had ended. Order had been restored. But the lesson of the evening would remain. Because even the smallest sound inside the palace could echo through the systems that protected it. And tonight, that echo had reminded everyone inside Kensington Palace why those systems existed. Not just for the crown, but for the family who lived beneath it. As the palace returned to its quiet rhythm, the events of the night left behind a deeper reflection, one that would echo far beyond a single corridor. Because sometimes the smallest cry inside a palace reveals the unseen strength that protects a royal legacy. By the time the final palace lights dimmed, silence had fully returned to Kensington Palace. The corridors that only hours earlier had carried the quiet urgency of investigation were once again still. Lamps glowed softly against the polished floors, and the portraits that lined the walls resumed their timeless watch over the residence. To anyone passing through the gates, nothing about the palace would appear different. The night had unfolded quietly. No alarms, no public disturbance. Yet inside those walls, a small moment had revealed something deeper about the nature of royal life. Moments earlier, the royal guard had completed their reports. Security systems were restored and normal monitoring. An investigation into the disturbance outside Princess Charlotte's room had reached its calm conclusion. The truth had been simple. Human. A trusted staff member had briefly stepped beyond a boundary designed to protect the royal family's private space. The action carried no malicious intent, only a misunderstanding of timing and protocol. Yet even such a small deviation had echoed through the palace's careful systems. Because within royal residences, the smallest details mattered. A door left ajar, a corridor crossed at the wrong moment, a sound heard by a child in the quiet of night. All of it mattered. Outside, the garden surrounding Kensington Palace rested beneath the dark London sky. The city beyond the palace gates continued its endless motion, unaware of the brief tension that had passed through the royal residence. Inside the family wing, however, the atmosphere carried a quiet sense of reflection. Standing alone near the window of his study, Prince William looked out toward the palace grounds. The events of the evening had unfolded quickly. A cry, an investigation, a revelation, and finally a decision. For William, the experience had reinforced something he had understood since childhood. The monarchy was sustained not only by ceremonies or traditions, but by the unseen vigilance of those who protected it. The royal guard, household staff, security officers. Every person inside the palace played a role in preserving the stability that allowed the royal family to live within its walls. Yet tonight had also revealed something else. Even the most advanced security systems could not replace human judgment. Trust remained the foundation of everything. Without it, the palace would simply be a building guarded by cameras and locked doors. With it, the palace became something more, a living institution, a place where duty and responsibility intertwined with everyday life. William rested his hands against the window frame. In the quiet reflection of the glass, the study behind him appeared almost unchanged from earlier that evening. The same desk, the same documents, the same calm atmosphere. But his thoughts had shifted, because the cry that echoed through the palace had not come from a public figure or a royal title. It had come from a child, and that simple fact carried its own meaning. Monarchies often appear distant to the outside world, wrapped in ceremony and tradition. But inside the palace walls, life remained deeply human. Parents reassured their children. Staff members carried out daily responsibilities. Guards stood watch through long, quiet nights. The crown might represent an institution centuries old, but the people beneath it still experienced ordinary fears and responsibilities. Tonight had reminded William of that balance. As the future king, he would one day carry responsibilities that extended far beyond the palace gates. But in moments like this, those responsibilities began somewhere smaller, within the quiet protection of his family. Behind him, the study door opened gently. The captain of the royal guard stepped inside, removing his cap respectfully. "Your Royal Highness." William turned. "Yes." "The final reports have been filed, sir." William nodded. "And the staff member?" "Mrs. Ellison has accepted the disciplinary review. She expressed deep regret for the incident." William considered the information. 17 years of service had earned the attendant a measure of understanding. Yet protocol remained clear. Inside the palace, rules existed not to create distance, but to protect those within. "Ensure the household office reviews the corridor access procedures," William said calmly. "Yes, sir." The captain paused for a moment before continuing. "There's something else I wish to mention." William looked toward him. "The young princess has fallen asleep." A faint smile crossed William's face. "That is good." "The nanny reports she seemed reassured." William nodded slowly. The captain hesitated briefly, then spoke again. "If I may say so, sir, the way you handled the situation tonight prevented unnecessary alarm among the staff." William gave a quiet nod. That was the intention. Royal households operated on stability. Panic or uncertainty inside such an environment could ripple outward quickly. Tonight, calm leadership had ensured the disturbance remained exactly what it was. A small moment, not a crisis. The captain placed his cap beneath his arm. "The palace security network will continue monitoring through the night." "Very well." The officer bowed slightly and stepped back toward the door. Before leaving, he paused one final time. "Your Royal Highness, there is something the guards often say during training." William raised an eyebrow slightly. "What is that?" The captain spoke with quiet respect. "That the strength of the crown is not measured during ceremonies, but during the quiet moments when no one is watching." For a moment, the room remained silent. Then William nodded. "Wise words." The captain left the study, closing the door softly behind him. William turned back toward the window. Beyond the glass, the palace grounds remained still. Somewhere in the distance, the city lights of London shimmered faintly against the horizon. The events of the night had already begun to fade into memory. Yet their lesson would remain, because history was often shaped by grand decisions and public moments. But the quiet strength of institutions was shaped somewhere else entirely, in unseen corridors, in silent watchfulness, in the calm decisions made when duty and family met. Inside Kensington Palace, another night settled gently across the royal residence. The palace would awaken again in the morning to its familiar rhythm. Staff would resume their duties. The royal guard would take their posts. And the royal family would continue their lives beneath the centuries-old traditions that define the monarchy. But somewhere within the palace's long history, this small moment would remain. A reminder that even the strongest institutions were built upon human responsibility. And sometimes, the quiet cry of a child could reveal the unseen systems that protected an entire legacy. In the end, the palace returned to silence, but the question lingered long after the lights dimmed. What truly defines royal strength, the crown itself, or the quiet choices made when no one else is there to witness them? Crown.